Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this Friday afternoon. And again, it's another slow day for basketball. Not really much going on, not really much big free agency news that just recently dropped. So in this first segment, I'm going to be talking about there was one thing that happened in the NBA. The NBA released its schedule. So for the first segment, I'm going to talk about rivalry week, because if I was to talk about every single game on the schedule, we'd be here forever. And I think rivalry week is something that not many people know about. I mean, I didn't know about it until now. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that. Then in the second segment, in the second, third, and fourth segments, now that I think about it, I'm going to be redoing some of the segments that previously didn't upload. If you guys are on the audio side, then you guys know which segments these are, so you don't have to watch. You don't have to really pay attention that much. This is more so for the people on the video side, because when I was uploading the videos, I thought it was uploaded, so just to clear space on my computer, I just deleted the entire file, and then when I woke up in the morning, the videos hadn't uploaded. So I bamboozled myself, but I can pick it back up and I can do the entire segment again. Luckily, most of the segments that I missed was just, lists that I have notes on in my phone, so it's not that difficult. And second segment is going to be talking about the best point guards, so continuing the list of the best players per position. Except now it's going to be point guard. Again, I thought I uploaded this before, so it was supposed to go point guard, shooting guard, small forward. Power forward list was supposed to come out today, but, had to change a couple of things. Then in the third segment, I'm going to be talking about the best player for each decade. And, just another list that just didn't want to upload. And then in the fourth segment, I'm going to talk about Team USA and possible future players going into the Olympics in 2028. Now, we also have a special fifth segment that I reveal at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that. I reveal it at the end of the fourth segment if you guys are interested in what that is. And before I begin with this first segment, I'd like to remind everybody that we love hearing from you during the show. Whether you've got a burning question, hot take on the game, something you've been dying to share, we're all ears. If you really want to make sure that your comment or question gets noticed, go ahead and use Super Chat. You can just hit the $ below the chat box, send in your message, and it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's also a great way to support our channel. We're so grateful for each and every one of you who joins us here. And let's keep the conversation going. Send in those Super Chats. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, then you can use the link displayed below the ticker. I got hiccups, excuse me. gsmcpodcast.net really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. And without further ado, let's go right ahead and get into NBA and its rivalry week. Now, again, I had no idea that rivalry... Can I speak English, please? I had no idea that rivalry week was a thing that the NFL was looking forward into pushing, I guess you could say. I thought it was sort of just a thing, it was just there. And it sort of seems like the narratives, behind these kinds of games are going to build up as the season goes on. The NBA is going to try to, and the media is going to try to force some rivalries, when in reality, it doesn't really feel like there are many rivalries in the NBA now. Everyone is really nice with each other. Everyone is, they say all these great things about each other. There isn't a time where it's this one guy and this other guy on two different teams or on two different franchises just absolutely despise each other. Maybe now, we'll see the Knicks and the Pacers rivalry stir up once again, but that thing started all the way back in in the 90s. So it's not we don't have many new rivalries, I guess you could say. And, there are some exceptions, as you'll see later down the road on this list. But, again, it doesn't really feel like they're rivalries. The atmosphere around it, the pressure around these games, it doesn't feel like a rivalry game. Now, the NBA also released their national TV games. And some of the, teams that ended up getting a large increase in national TV games for this coming season are the Timberwolves with 15, the Thunder with 12, the Knicks with 9, the Pacers with 8, and for some reason the Houston Rockets with 7. Now, this is obviously, a result of the new media rights deal that the NBA signed, allowing them to have more nationally covered games. So, as a result, we're going to have way more games to watch in the NBA season as opposed to last year, where it was like, you only had that one primetime game and a couple of other games. Now it's like every game is going to be on national TV. And Timberwolves and the Thunder make total sense. They're franchises that are somewhat irrelevant until they have that one great player. Like, the Thunder, I can't even say that the Thunder have been irrelevant, but they've been a little, they haven't really been as popular as they were now, because now they actually realize that their team is, like, winning. And the Timberwolves, they barely get popular, like, at all. And a big part of that is because of Anthony Edwards and his prowess in the postseason. Now, the Knicks, when the Knicks get good, they always get national TV games. It always happens. They always get a boost in national TV ratings because everyone watches the Knicks. Whether you watch them to see them fail, whether you watch them because, they're the Knicks or like they're good or this, that, and the other. They're a very popular franchise, and it only makes sense that they got an increase in national TV games. Pacers, they also got a huge increase with 8, and it makes sense because of, Halliburton and just how good the squad really is. The Rockets are the only team that I have no idea why they have so many nationally televised games, but maybe it's because they want to sort of push in that rookie that they got, right? But aside from that, and aside from maybe Sengun or maybe even, I don't even know, like, why, I don't know why the Rockets would have such a huge increase in these games. Like, I would have rather seen a team like, I don't know, maybe Miami have an increase in these national TV games as opposed to a team like Houston, but I digress. So, rivalry week. Now, this rivalry week starts on the 21st in January, so a little bit later than the NBA like in-season tournament, I believe, and it's gonna be around the time where I believe the NFL is going to die down, so that way the NBA is going to be able to play a lot more games as opposed to constantly playing these NFL games. So the first rivalry game is the Knicks going up against the Nets. Obviously, the rivalry there is just the fact that they are both teams in the same city. And, same city teams usually always have rivalries, but in the NBA, it doesn't really feel like a rivalry. Again, like these might be rivalry games, but they don't really feel like rivalry games because it's like either one is good or either one is bad, at least between the Knicks and the Nets. And it's like you usually can tell which team is going to end up coming out on top. And, I mean, maybe now there's like a little bit of bitterness because the Knicks recently just traded for Mikal Bridges, and now the Nets are just not good. But I don't really see that as like a big rivalry game. I don't know. That's just me. Next is Joel Embiid going up against Nikola Jokic. The Nuggets going up against Philly. And not only do they have a matchup between Jokic and Joel Embiid, but there's also going to be Russell Westbrook matching up with Paul George as well. And, I mean, we know the history of Russell Westbrook and Paul George. They didn't really almost do anything now that I think about it. They played really well in OKC, but again, they only made it as far as the first round. So the fact that they're former teammates somewhat makes it a rivalry. Again, somewhat. And it's really Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. But if the game is going to be played in Denver, I don't think Joel is going to be playing. He never plays in Denver. Next game on this list is the Timberwolves against the Dallas Mavericks. Again, this is sort of like, a new rivalry given the playoff series and how they played. And, it's just going to be pretty interesting seeing a rematch of these two teams. Next is the Golden State Warriors and the Sacramento Kings. I totally understand this as a rivalry. The Sacramento Kings, they made the postseason in that 1 year, and Steph Curry dropped 50 points on them at home and ruined their chances of making a deep playoff run. And that stings a lot of Kings fans. That really does sting a lot of Kings fans. They don't like the Golden State Warriors. They bring up the fact that Klay Thompson went 0 for 10 in an elimination game religiously to the point where it is ingrained in everyone's heads. And if Steph Curry did that to my team, I would despise the Warriors as well. So that's not that bad of a rivalry game. Next is Miami against the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis against Jimmy Butler. They had, a little bit of a history going up against each other in the postseason. It's usually back and forth. The Miami Heat end up winning, then the Bucks end up winning, then the Miami Heat end up winning. Whether you consider the Miami Heat and the Bucks a rivalry or not, or whether you think that the Celtics are a better rivalry against the Miami Heat, this is still a really good game and something to look forward to. Next is the Lakers going up against the Boston Celtics. Pretty basic, like the two most gifted and the two most decked out, I guess you could say, teams in NBA history. And, it only makes sense that there's going to be a Lakers versus Celtics matchup in there at one point. Next is Zion against Ja Morant, so Memphis against the Pelicans, or the Pelicans against Memphis, if you want to go in that order. And a lot of people are thinking, why is this a rivalry? Because these guys are, really good friends. And this is sort of where I think that the rivalry games are sort of dipping, because it's like everyone likes each other. And Zion and Ja are a pretty good example. And the biggest reason why they often get put head to head was because they're in the same draft class. Ja Morant was, Zion was expected to win Rookie of the Year, but because of his off the court problems, Ja Morant ended up playing more games, and Ja Morant ended up winning the award. And not to mention, those two players, now that I think about it, they're kind of cursed with off-court luck. You have Zion Williamson, who allegedly eats too much, according to the media, and then you have Ja Morant, who allegedly pulls out a fake gun, pulls out a real gun, whatever he does, allegedly. And, allegedly it's on camera. And it's like, he shows it off, and it's like, these things, they hurt their careers, but they both have flaws that both hurt their careers equally. Like, the media will either like Zion, and then they'll clown him. The media will either like Ja, and then they'll clown him, right? Like, it's, they have a lot of similarities, especially, being dunkers, too. And next game is the Nuggets against the Timberwolves. Again, not really much of a rivalry when you think about it, but it's the fact that they met up in the postseason, and the postseason went down the way that it did, because the Nuggets, they were up by so much at home, and then all of a sudden the Timberwolves ended up coming out of nowhere and beating them in the end. Or actually, wait, no, it was the other way around. Now that I think about it, they were playing in Minnesota. That's my bad. But then again, these guys, they were up by so much, and then they just dropped it. And then finally, well, not really finally, actually. There's two final games left. The Lakers against the Warriors. Obviously, LeBron and Steph. That's a rivalry. It's been a rivalry for the longest time. And finally, the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks. This is a finals rematch, not to mention the beef that they have with Kyrie Irving. So, makes sense. That's rivalry week for all of you guys. And with that, we are out of time for this first segment. So now I will go ahead and go into the second segment, where I redo one of the segments that I was supposed to do that was supposed to be uploaded on the YouTube side. So for those of you guys on the audio side, if you guys have followed the podcast and you've seen this podcast episode of the best point guards, then you can go ahead and skip it, because I'm basically going to be covering the exact same things. So I'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing hit the news if it's some loose shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this segment, I'm going to be talking about the best point guards in the NBA right now. Again, it's a redo, so for those of you guys that are on the audio side, you don't really need to. You've already seen this, you've already heard this, and you don't really have to listen to it again. But for those of you guys on the video side, you guys haven't seen this, so I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it in this segment. Before I begin, however, I'd like to remind everybody that we do love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments. And your support, it means a lot to us. Whether you've got a burning question, a hot take for the game, or something that you've been dying to share, we're all ears. So you could hit the $ below in the chat box, send in your message. It's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's also a great way to support our channel. And we're so grateful for every single one of you who joins us here. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, you can use the link in the description, as well as the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. It really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. And let's go right ahead and break down this list of the top point guards in the NBA. Now, the slide isn't popping up. That's always fantastic. Give me 1 second. There we go. Now, number 1 makes total sense. It's Luka Doncic. If Luka Doncic is not number 1, you're wrong. It's that simple. Luka recently made the finals. He's averaged almost a triple-double throughout the entirety of his career. He's been in the running for MVP so many times, especially in the beginning of the season. Like in every single season, he seems to be a favorite to win the MVP until Jokic just comes in and rains all over his parade. And again, Luka Doncic in the postseason, he was fantastic. He was also insane in the regular season, as he always is. And, you know, making the first finals of your entire career it's a pretty big deal. He was third in MVP voting this year. He averaged 33 points per game, 9 rebounds, and almost 10 assists while shooting 48% from the field and 38% from three. He was ridiculous. And one of the craziest things that, you know, I can't believe was actually, like, I actually believe was that Kyrie and Luka wasn't going to be a good fit. There were a lot of people that thought that this fit wasn't going to end up being great, and that the Mavericks ended up giving up too many players on the defensive side of the ball in order to be good enough of a team to compete. But they proved every single one of those haters wrong. And, I mean, they proved me wrong. And again, it's like they were super close to making it all the way and winning it. But ultimately, they ended up losing due to, whether you want to blame it on Kyrie, whether you don't want to blame it on Kyrie, or just the fact that the Celtics are just a better overall team. Either or, they ended up losing, which is unfortunate, but still, he is the best point guard in this league. And SGA, the point guard that is behind Luka Doncic, and, you know, despite the fact that SGA was second in MVP voting compared to Luka Doncic, who was third in MVP voting, I would much rather have Luka Doncic on the team, and I would much rather see him as the best point guard in the NBA as opposed to SGA, mainly because SGA, you know, he by far has the better team than the Dallas Mavericks, but they still weren't able to do much aside from make it past the first round against a team that barely made the play-in. And he averaged 30 points per game last season, 53% from the field, 35% from three, was a completely different animal in the postseason. He averaged 30 points per game. A lot of people were questioning whether or not SGA would play well in the postseason. I don't know why people were questioning that, but it was questioned. He shot almost 50% from the field, 43% from three, and was also averaging 30 and 6 assists, along with 7 rebounds as well. And again, the rest of the point guards on this list, like, you'll clearly see that SGA is just better than, and his bag and his repertoire is ridiculous. The one bad thing, like, the one thing that could be considered as bad about SGA is that he doesn't take enough three-pointers. And when your issue is that you don't take enough threes, but you still drop 30 points, I don't think that's really much of an issue. It's like every single game I look at the box scores and SGA has like 31 or 32. That is his lucky number. He always gets that, and it's like it's every single game. It's ridiculous. So he's number 2 on this list. Third is Stephen Curry. Obviously, these Olympics are giving him a boost in this rating a little bit because last season Steph Curry was a little bit disappointing. Not individually, but just from a team perspective. The team lost in the play-in when usually, you're expected to see Curry in the postseason and things like that. But his season, like, the season that he had last season, it wasn't bad. 26 points per game, 4 rebounds, 5 assists. It just wasn't as broken and as ridiculous as the numbers that SGA and Luka Doncic averaged. So obviously, the Olympics, they're a big part of it, and like they're a big part of the reason why he's so high on this list. And on top of the fact that his resume, he is the best shooter in NBA history. He has the most championships compared to anybody on this point guard list. So, I had to put him in here. If he wasn't in here, it was basically a crime. And for those of you guys that might be questioning, no, I do not have Kyrie Irving at point guard. I have him at shooting guard. If you guys are interested in the shooting guards video, that is uploaded in the channel, so you can go right ahead and figure out who I think are the best shooting guards in the NBA. Now, next player on this list is Jalen Brunson. And, this might have a little bit of bias towards it. You might want to put some other point guards above him. But the reality is Jalen Brunson is a bucket. He is an offensive talent. He is an offensive demon. He's ridiculous. He made the Knicks relevant. And that really takes a special person because making the Knicks relevant is so difficult. And he averaged 28 points per game. Shot 47% from the field. Also shot 40% from 3 in the regular season. In the postseason, he averaged 32 points per game, shot 44% from the field, 31% from 3 was out, and again, he averaged 32 and 7 assists along with that. He also went on a ridiculous streak where he almost broke the record for most consecutive 30-point games in the postseason, I believe. Maybe it was 40-point games. I don't really remember, but I do know that he was a monster in the postseason. I do remember how crazy he was as in the postseason, and the only reason why he's not higher on this list is because his numbers aren't really that crazy. And because he also lost pretty early in the postseason. That's really like the only reason why I don't have him higher on this list. And I'm just looking at my notes, by the way, so don't mind me if I'm looking off to the side. But again, like Jalen Brunson, he is in my opinion, the 4th best point guard in the NBA right now. And he also, one of the things that I forgot to mention, he passed Carmelo Anthony in postseason points as a New York Knick, which is incredible. And he's also the first player ever to have 40 points with a made 3 in 4 straight playoff games. And again, that's just ridiculous what he does, especially in the postseason. His performance against the 76ers was nothing short of amazing. Now, next player on this list is Ja Morant. Now, a lot of people are probably not going to put Ja Morant on this list so high, given the fact that he wasn't playing last season. But this is going into the season, and, given what Ja Morant has been able to do so early in his career, I mean, I think it would be a sin not to put him as one of the top 5 point guards in this league right now. He averaged 25 points per game in the 9 games that he played. Not a very good 3-point shooter, but he does make up for it for his jumps and just, his peak offensive game that he has. And he's gone in like pretty far in the postseason, like a little bit. He's made it to the second round when no one really thought he was going to even make it to the second round. And he's also, like, again, he's made the postseason in every single year that he's healthy. He's the biggest reason why the Grizzlies are a powerhouse of a team. I used to think that the team was just really good and they didn't really need Ja Morant, because there was this one point in time where the Memphis Grizzlies, they were 20-2 without Ja Morant. And, I always thought that Ja, didn't really make the team, but given what has happened this season and how irrelevant the Memphis Grizzlies were, I think you'd be foolish not to put Ja Morant pretty high on this list. Next is Trae Young. Again, one of the more underrated players in the NBA. You're probably not going to want to put him on this list at all if you're a Knicks fan, and you're also probably not going to want to put him this high on the list given how he was injured as well. But despite that, I think Trae Young has been way more consistent than most of the point guards in the entire NBA. And he was one of the biggest stains, I guess you could say, is the fact that the Hawks traded for him. They traded Luka to get him, and it doesn't really seem like he's doing as much as Luka is in the NBA, but he does get the job done. Throughout every single year that he's been in the NBA, he's averaged more assists as the years go on. He went from averaging 8 to averaging 9.3, then 9.7, and now he's finally averaging 10. And he's also averaging 26 points or more in all those seasons as well. And he's a bit inefficient from the field. He has the tendency of being a little bit of a shot chucker, but aside from that, he's very, very consistent. He has been consistent. He's been top 5 in assist averages and total assists in every single season since he's been in the league, aside from his rookie year. And that's consistency. And I'm going to put someone who's consistent constantly over someone who maybe had a miracle run, depending on how miracle of a run that is. SGA having that crazy season, I don't think it was a fluke either. But that's sort of my reasoning why I would put Trae Young on this list so early. And not only that, the next players on this list I just don't think are better than him. De'Aaron Fox. Again, another snub from last season. He did not make an All-Star game. He did not make an All-NBA team. And it's crazy how someone who averages almost 26 points per game isn't even considered for being in the All-Star game. That is insane. Same thing applies with his teammate in Sabonis, but again, not Donovan, De'Aaron Fox and his numbers, he averaged 26 points per game, was leading the league in steals, also averaged 5.6 assists, along with shooting 46% from the field, and was in the running for Clutch Player of the Year. Again, it's the fact that he was snubbed, and I really can't see any other point guards aside from the ones that I mentioned being better than him. And you'll see in the list, again, you can go ahead and disagree with this list. It's my list. You can do whatever you want. But again, I just think De'Aaron Fox, he's very talented. Now, Maxey is going to be next on this list. I mean, if you actually listen to the podcast, I put Halliburton over Maxey, but I decided to change my mind on that because when I really thought about it, I'm more afraid of Tyrese Maxey going off than Tyrese Halliburton going off. And, Halliburton, he can get the assists, he can get the passes and things like that, but it's Maxey, he's just different. What that guy did to the Knicks in the postseason, he scored 7 points in the span of 5 seconds or something like that. And it was, again, I haven't seen that since Reggie Miller or something like that. And again, I wasn't even born when Reggie Miller did that. But or, a little bit more of an accurate one, I guess you could say, was I haven't seen that since T-Mac. But again, the way that he plays, just the fact that I understand he is the second option, but I would much rather have him as the point guard and, his jump as opposed to having Tyrese Halliburton, who is next on this list. Again, I'm not a big fan of Tyrese Halliburton. I understand he's a great passer. I think his jump shot is a little funky. I mean, it works, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm just not all that hyped about him. I don't think the Pacers would have gotten as far in the postseason as they did had every single team been healthy. And I also think the Pacers as a team, they're just better overall than the 76ers, and it's like Halliburton doesn't really need to do much. There were several postseason games where I saw Tyrese Halliburton just standing there, passing the ball, not doing anything, and the team was still close. Like, they were not in jeopardy at all of losing the game because Halliburton wasn't doing this or Halliburton wasn't doing that, as opposed to Maxey, where it's like, if he doesn't do this, if he doesn't do that, then the team is in immediate jeopardy. And finally, Damian Lillard, he's the last player on this list. He turned into one of the most overrated players the league has ever seen ever since that one series in OKC when he hit that crazy half-court shot. And this season, arguably one of his weakest seasons since entering the NBA. He was expected to play really well alongside Giannis. Then injuries happen, and that was really the big problem. But again, with how the team was going with Damian Lillard, I was always concerned. Like, there was never a point in time where I thought Dame was going to take over. He seemed very rusty, and he's lucky that he even made the All-Star game last year. I think it was mainly due to popularity. But aside from that, he did not deserve to make that All-Star team, and his play it wasn't all that. Like, that's just my opinion on it. But let me know in the comments what you guys think of this list. Those are the top 10 point guards in the NBA. So now I will go ahead and go into the next segment where I talk about the best players in each decade of the NBA right after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, I'm going to be talking about the best players for each and every single decade of the NBA. So from its conception and all the way back in 1960, all the way up until now, these are going to be, this is like, in my opinion, the best players for each and every single decade. Now, I'm going to start with 2020 just because it's quite recent. And I would think, I think that makes the most sense. And I feel like everyone's really interested in hearing who I think the best player of this decade is. And that is Jokic. Again, for those of you guys on the audio side, you guys have probably already heard this segment, so you can skip. You don't need to watch it. But for those of you guys on the video side, you guys haven't seen my opinions on this. And I think Jokic, so far, given what he's done in this past decade, he is by far the best player in the NBA in this decade period. I don't think there's anyone else that even comes close to him. Some might argue Luka Doncic was the best player in this decade. Some might argue Giannis was the best player in this decade, but really, it's been Nikola Jokic. The man has averaged almost a triple-double in almost every single year since the 2020 season started, and he's only gotten better. The one thing that he's missing in averaging a triple-double are the assists, and he's always just a little bit off of averaging a triple-double. But it's not just because he averages triple-doubles, it's because he's crazy efficient while he's averaging those triple-doubles. I mean, he shoots 56+% from the field and shoots pretty decent clip from three. He shot 35% from three last season, and again, just throughout his tenure with, or throughout the years with the Denver Nuggets, the last 4 years to be exact, he's just been a completely different animal. There has not been a single year in this decade where he hasn't won some kind of MVP. Like, in 2020, that was like when he was on the come up of being one of the better players and being one of the more recognized big men in the NBA. But once 2020, 2021 hit, once that season hit, he's been by far the best player in the NBA, period. He won back-to-back MVPs. Then he came second in MVP voting, which I think was flat out wrong. And I think the media really did him dirty that year because he was averaging 63% shooting from the field, 38% shooting from three, as well as almost averaging a triple-double, 24, 11, and 9.8. But he only came in second to Joel Embiid. I think that was wrong, but he made up for it in the postseason, winning the Finals MVP. So it's like every single year since 2021, he's won some kind of MVP for the NBA. And it's like, how could you not consider him the best player in the NBA right now? Like, yes, sure, Luka has a pretty good argument, but Luka hasn't won an MVP yet. And he also hasn't won a championship yet, which is something that Nikola Jokic has done. Giannis, he might have a little bit of a better argument just because he won the championship, but that's just about it. Like, that's really just about it. Aside from winning the championship and winning Defensive Player of the Year, that's really all that he's done. And, well, on top of winning the MVP. But Jokic has done way more. So I think Jokic is the best player going into this decade. Now, the 2010s, that one's easy. That one's LeBron. No question about that. I mean, if you have the only other two players that I think would even be considered for this spot is Stephen Curry or Kevin Durant. And the biggest reason why they're not on this spot is because they both teamed up to stop him. That should speak more than any stat that I can pull up about LeBron. The fact that the two best players two of the top three best players in the entire decade teamed up with each other to beat that guy. Like, I don't know, if that doesn't speak volume, I don't know what does. And, I mean, everyone knows LeBron's legacy in 2010. Like, he won the MVP in the first year of 2010. Then afterwards, he made the finals practically every single year aside from that 1 year in 2018 and 2019 when it was his first stint with the Lakers. But aside from that, he's literally made the finals in every year aside from two of them in the 2010 NBA, like in 2010 to 2020. And he's won 4 championships in that span. He's won 4 finals MVPs in that span. He has won 3 MVPs in that span. He's averaged at least 25, 7, and 7 in every single one of those games. He is the best player in the world. He's the best player, period. And there's really, like, he is the greatest basketball player of all time, in my opinion. And it's like, you either believe it or you don't. And there's nothing that I can say that would change your mind. But in 2010, if you were to give me any player to build a team around, give me LeBron. Period. End of story. Doesn't matter. And again, like Steph Curry, he does have the argument, and KD also has an argument, but the reason why I'm not putting KD on here, like for even considering him over Steph Curry or LeBron, is because KD had to join Steph in order to win a championship. And the only reason why I'm not putting Steph on there is because Steph didn't win a single Finals MVP in that 10 year in 2010. So I can't really put him on the list over somebody like LeBron. And let's face it, nobody in 2010 even measures up to LeBron in terms of legacy and resume or anything. Let's be real. And next we're going to go on to 2000s. Now this is a little bit more, I'm way more flexible with 2000s. Like I have Kobe Bryant as the best player in the 2000s, but if you were to have somebody else, like maybe, Tim Duncan, someone like that, I could totally see your reasoning for having Tim Duncan in here instead of having Kobe Bryant. But really, I grew up in a time when Kobe Bryant, he was considered the second or the third best player in the entire history of the NBA. Like, there was literally a time where people thought he was one of the best, one of the GOATs. And now all of a sudden he, like, goes away from that and becomes a little bit lower in the top 10 on a lot of people's lists, which really confused me. Like, I really didn't understand why. But in the 2000s, obviously we know the Lakers, they won their championship in 2000s. They also won in 2001 and in 2000. Well, they also won in 2002. They won in 2000, 2001, 2002. And then he also won in 2009 and 2010. So he does have more championships than Tim Duncan does in that span. But you could make the argument that Tim Duncan had a much better career and a much better tenure with the Spurs than Kobe did with the Lakers. And, I mean, in the postseason, Kobe was a different breed. He did have some of those postseasons where it was like, I don't know about that. Like, could have been a little bit better. He also had some performances in those postseasons where he was just not all there. There were also some other postseasons where he was also just not all there. And, you know, again, if you have someone like Tim Duncan on this as the best player, I am not opposed to that. But I think Kobe, like the combined dominance on accolades, the prowess, the mentality, all of that stuff, I think it's just great. Like, I think all of it is just, you know, no one can match up to Kobe in terms of skill, and I don't think anyone can match up to Kobe in terms of competitiveness unless you're this guy right here, the one and only, the legendary bald man, Michael Jordan. He's not bald in this picture, but everyone knows that he's bald, and everyone knows that he is just, you know, a completely different being that transcends the realities of NBA basketball. Like, that's the, not really the thought process, but that's sort of the aura that Michael Jordan has. So easily the best player in the 90s, no questions about that. No one even in, like, consideration for being a top player in the 90s, aside from Michael Jordan, because he was, like, the only player in the 90s that is worth talking about winning. And he got all of his 6 championships in the 90s. Next, Magic Johnson. Again, this is pretty easy. A lot of people might put Larry Bird as opposed to Magic, but I mean, again, Magic, he has more championships, and he ended up getting the same amount of MVPs. So I would much rather put Magic on this list as opposed to Larry Bird. A lot of people also rank Magic a bit higher than Larry Bird on their all-time list, so there's more. Again, don't really need to talk about it that much, because aside from those two, there's not really anyone else that's been in the competition. Next is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and again, not really many people in the conversation. He is considered the best center in NBA history for a reason, so he's making this list. And finally, the cheat code himself, Wilt Chamberlain. Again, the only other, actually, now that I think about it, the only other player that can really, like, measure up to him is Bill Russell, but that's really because of his championships. If you really get down to it, Bill won those championships because of just how great the team was, and, like, you know, compared to everyone else. But Wilt, he was a monster, and rules were literally changed because of him. So that's who I'd consider the best player in the 60s. Those are my best players for each decade. I hope you enjoyed listening to that list. So now I will go ahead and go into the next segment, which is going to be talking about some notes about Team USA and who is possibly going to make the roster for next in the next 4 years. So I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, I'm actually going to be doing two things. I'm going to talk about the FIBA rankings and how they've changed, as well as who I think is going to be on the future roster for the United States Olympic team. Obviously, you know, they ended up winning the gold, but majority of their key players, LeBron, Steph, Kevin Durant, probably not going to make probably not going to be on the roster in the next 4 years. Anthony Edwards also said he wasn't considering in playing for the Olympics again, but who knows, maybe that'll change. But again, like he said, he wasn't considering it. So that leaves a lot of spots open for a lot of players and a lot of possibilities and a lot of rosters. Now, let's go over the FIBA rankings first, right? So South Sudan, they played their first ever Olympic basketball game, and they jumped up 11 spots in the FIBA World Ranking, and they have the only double-digit push among all the top 50 nations that are in FIBA. Japan gave France a pretty big scare in that one game when they played in the Olympics, and they ended up losing, but they moved up 5 spots to be ranked 21st in the FIBA World Ranking. France is the highest climbing nation in the top 20, jumped up 5 spots after their appearance in the gold medal game, and they are now ranked 4th. And the Philippines, they didn't reach the Olympics, but defeated Latvia, then number 6 in the quarterfinals, while giving Georgia and Brazil a little bit of a run for their money. So these are the big changes in the rankings for FIBA. So now let's go ahead and talk about the possibility for the roster of Team USA. Now, I think most of the players that are that were on the team, they're probably going to want to participate in it again, hoping that they can get a much bigger role. Like Devin Booker, Jason Tatum, Bam Adebayo, Derek White. Those are some players that I think that could make the roster yet again. Not 100% sold on Anthony Edwards, and Anthony Edwards, he's the only reason why I'm not sold on that is because he said he wasn't going to do that. But again, he said a lot of crazy things in the past, so maybe he's just being dramatic, who knows. Some other players that I could see make their debut for Team USA, Jaylen Brown. I don't know exactly what Jaylen Brown's relationship with United States basketball is, if it's good, if it's bad now, but I do think that he has the potential to make the roster, especially with all the slots opening up. Next player that I have, I did mention Derek White now that I think about it. Next player is Paolo Banchero, and I really feel like he's one of the most underrated forwards in the entire league. His game sort of reminds me of a mix of LeBron and Carmelo Anthony. I think that's accurate. He's a bucket getter, and he was great in the postseason as well for the Orlando Magic. He ended up taking them to 7 games, and they ended up losing in the final game. They abused their home court advantage, though. Every single time they had home court advantage, they ended up winning, but at the same time, every time they went on the road, they ended up losing. So it's you take the good from the bad. But again, this is his second year in the entire NBA. He's already made the All-Star team. He averaged 22 points per game, and in the playoffs, he averaged 27 points per game, was shooting 45% from the field as well as 40% from 3, along with 8 rebounds and 4 assists. That is really good for being in your second year and expecting to lead a team against a pretty competent team. Again, the games weren't really that popular. The Magic and the Cavs series was probably one of the least watched series in the entire playoffs. But again, aside from that, I really do think that Paolo Banchero would make the USA roster. Next player would be Chet Holmgren. That would be great for the views because then we'd see a rematch of Chet against Victor Wembanyama. We saw them play against each other on the under-18 team for both, France and the United States, and that's sort of where the rivalry started because they're two giant centers both playing the exact same position, and they both can get crazy amount of blocks. I do think that Chet, if he does develop into the player that everyone says that he is, and all of his fans think that he is, he could be a pretty good matchup for Victor in the future. And again, I just think he's a very good pick. Why wouldn't you want to have someone who's 7'2" and can dribble like a guard? Then we have De'Aaron Fox. Again, he was snubbed, and I mentioned him before on my previous lists. And I do think that De'Aaron Fox, he would be a very good asset for the team. And it's sort of maybe we don't have that many dunkers, I don't think, on the team. We don't have that many people that demand attention. Aside from Anthony Edwards and LeBron, there weren't that many people that were demanding attention at the rim, and I think having De'Aaron there would definitely help that. next players on this list, they could be, I think Cade Cunningham, if he develops into a pretty competent guard, he could end up making the USA roster, along with Mikal Bridges and Jaren Jackson. This is sort of where the roster's coming to. Again, hopefully, we can make a much better roster than this, but this is sort of what the roster's coming to. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, oh my god, this roster is horrible. But again, this roster isn't set in stone, and these players can easily all of them, they can improve come 4 years. But again, if we're going to talk about, if we're going to think about it from a standing of having the best players in the NBA, USA really doesn't have them. Serbia has Jokic. Luka Doncic, he's one of the best players in the NBA. He's not American. Giannis Antetokounmpo, also not American. Victor Wembanyama, also not American. There's so many more athletes in the NBA now that are from overseas and are really good, as opposed to USA athletes that are just really good at basketball. It seems like there's better European players. It's just the United States have more talented players on the roster, as opposed to just having a big player on the roster, which is really the big difference between USA play and most international games. But that's basically my list for the players that are going to be making the United States team next year. Let me know what you guys think of that list in the comments. If you guys think I'm way off, if you guys think, that's a pretty solid team. But now we are on the final segment, so I'm going to go ahead and have a quick little break, and then after that I'm going to talk about the Clippers and their stadium. So again, these are just a little bit shorter segments. I did spend a lot of time on the lists, but so this is going to be a little bit of a shorter segment because I don't really feel the need to talk about it all that much. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this final segment, I'm going to talk about the Clippers Arena. So it's called the Intuit Dome, and it's been one of the most anticipated things for the Clippers since acquiring Kawhi and Paul George. And so this is going to be the first time, this is going to be the first season where the Lakers and the Clippers, they don't share the same venue, and they don't share the same stadium. And this was it was expected to be really big. It was expected to be really awesome and really huge. This is a pretty cool idea. And one thing that rubbed people the wrong way a little bit was the fact that it had facial recognition, which is something that's pretty scary. And it had this new system in play where it was it uses, all sorts of new technology. It's a very, very complicated dome. It's not something that you see all that often. And it looks from what I've seen, from clips that I've seen, it looks great. It looks cool. It would look awesome to be in that stadium, in that arena, pardon me. But apparently it had a lot of problems. So everyone, like, according to this headline, everyone is making the same joke about the Clippers' Intuit Dome after their embarrassing opening night disaster. So this ended up happening yesterday. So it's like the Dome is not off to a great start. On Thursday night, Bruno Mars, an artist, in case you guys have no idea who he is, I feel very bad for you. He was supposed to take the stage at 8 p.m., but he didn't end up starting the show until before 10 o'clock. And I know what you're thinking. That is a huge gap to waiting. Like, what was the deal? What was the issue? Was Bruno Mars sick? Was he having was he having a signature flu performance like Michael Jordan? Like, was he food poisoning or something like that? What happened? And the big problem was the fact that the system that the Clippers had in place for letting people in, it just didn't work. Now, I'm going to go ahead and read the article and what it says. Thousands were left waiting outside the Intuit Dome due to multiple problems slowing down the entry process. So, right off the bat, the Dome is already experiencing some technical difficulties with bringing the fans in. And, like, when you start, in sports, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Like, that's always what I think about in sports. You could start playing really bad, but as long as you end up winning the game in the end, it's all good. But this is sports related, yes, but this isn't a game. So if your opening night is horrible, the rest of your years are going to be horrible. And this really it's really difficult to establish a great first impression. And when you establish a bad one, everyone is only going to remember the bad one. So Bruno Mars fans outside of the Clippers stadium, they were left fuming as they found themselves locked out of the Clippers' new $2.0 billion venue and ticket scanner. Like, for some reason, the ticket scanning was messing up, at least according to this article. And not only that, the Wi-Fi around the Dome was horrible. Not to mention the facial recognition that made it so popular also didn't work. And all of these problems, they caused the show to be delayed for a couple of hours. And there was even somebody on TikTok who had a lot of things to say. She was like, at the opening of Intuit Stadium for Bruno Mars concert, and it's a disaster. You ruined my dad's birthday. That's what the TikTok says. So, boo-hoo for the dad's birthday. But another thing that was the problem for the Dome is that it only has one entrance. Yeah, only one way to get through the Dome. There's no way to get out, just one way in, one way out. And there were a lot of people on Twitter complaining about the Dome. And it opened Thursday night again, and the facial recognition system, it wasn't working. The app crashed, which left thousands of folks standing outside. Bruno Mars eventually took the stage around 2 hours later. He surprised everyone in Intuit Dome by bringing out Lady Gaga as well. And really, it's just the process of getting in, that was the biggest problem for a lot of the fans going into this Dome. And it's how do you not have people to test these sort of conditions before you launch it? I guess with Wi-Fi, it's a little bit unpredictable because the more people you have on a specific Wi-Fi channel, the more data it'll consume, and the more difficult it is to sort of process all of that data. But at the same time, why weren't tests run on these sort of things? Why now at launch? These are the kind of things that seem basic. Once the idea is conceived, these should be the type of things that you should think about, and these should be the type of things that you fix and make sure work accordingly, because you can't get your fans in. That's only going to drive them away. And I don't understand how you could mess up something so detrimental, and the season hasn't even started yet. It's really gonna be. I also don't agree with the facial recognition thing. I think that's just a horrible idea. I don't like facial recognition. The Cowboys are doing that too in the NFL stadium, and I don't like that idea at all. Not many people like that idea either, because it's why do you need to see my face? Why can't I have privacy when I'm just watching a game? Why do you have to look at me and just pull out my data from wherever it is? But aside from that, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the facial recognition, and none of the people that were waiting were a fan of the facial recognition. I don't know how they use facial recognition over there. Maybe they use it to like allow people to get in to make sure that, oh, you definitely purchased this ticket. You didn't steal it. Go right ahead. But it just didn't work. Like, it's a good idea in the head, but just a horrible performance out there. And eventually it will get fixed. But starting off with this kind of reputation as being a bad dome and a bad arena, it's never, when things eventually get good, people aren't going to believe it because they're only going to think about, the bad. Like, ever since, MetLife is bad, but ever since MetLife, got claims of it being bad, like at the beginning, everyone thought it was fantastic, but after a while, once everyone thought it was bad, it doesn't matter what happens on the field, everyone thinks it's bad. And you can never change that opinion. So, let that be. I'll just let that sit there for all of you guys that are just, that are interested in this kind of thing. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think that this dome is going to be a much better success when the regular season starts, or do you think they sort of blew their chances? But aside from that, we are out of time for this segment. That is all for the show that I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really makes a difference. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And as I said before in the first two segments, we really like hearing from you guys during the show, whether you've got a burning question, a hot take for the game, or something you've been dying to share. We are all ears, and you can hit the $sign button below in the chat box to send in your message, and it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's also a great way to support the channel, as Super Chat helps us keep the lights on. We're so grateful for each and every one of you who joins us here to support. It makes all the difference. If Super Chat isn't really your thing, you can always go ahead and use the link displayed below the ticker or in the description, gsmcpodcast.net. It really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. That is all I have for you today on this segment. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys next week, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.